Welcome to APG Pathshala. I am Raghuram Raju from University of Hyderabad. We are going to discuss the module, The Idea of Equality, written by Dr. Akash Singh Rathore. The idea of equality is one of the core values of contemporary social and political philosophy all around the world. The reason why I emphasize that all around the world is that with the advent of modernity, the idea of equality gained currency in the West. And that is a very remarkable event that took place, and this idea of equality was pursued systematically, programmatically within the West after the advent of modernity. But there are some people outside the West, for instance in India, who did talk about the idea of equality. At least they are the ones who rejected or criticized the discrimination in India, starting from the Kabir, Ravidas, Tukaram, Guru Nanak, Jyotirao Phule, to the recent thinker and activist such as Periyar, Ayodhya Das, and B.R. Ambedkar. B.R. Ambedkar used both the internal resources, particularly from Buddhism, and the external resources, those from modernity, particularly with liberalism, in order to incorporate them in the Constitution of India. So there are in the Constitution of India both the internal resources and the external resources. The idea of equality in the West is a modern one, and that too was not extended universally to everyone, but it was only slowly evolved to become more inclusive subsequently. From the point of view of the Anglophone academic philosophy, the momentum for philosophical study of equality can be traced to the publication of A Theory of Justice by John Rawls. Rawls, in this magnum opus, which has really attracted the attention within America and outside in the 20th century, used both utilitarianism and contract theories selectively to advance a novel theory of justice. What is equality? Equality within academic debates is generally agreed to be: one, it is relational, meaning that it relates to multiple things, persons, primarily persons from a shared political community, to one another. So it is relational in the sense that it is related to two different people and amongst more than two people. And the second meaning of equality is that it is distinct from identity, meaning that we are not speaking of equality between two persons in all respects. 3, equality has different but still related connotations, in the sense that equality at the realm of political, there is a legal equality, there is a moral equality, or equality can be seen as a social concept, such as in the moral usage of the term equal dignity, or it also has a legal usage of equality before law. The fourth one is, it is also conceived of largely as distributional in nature, that distributing opportunities, distributing resources, and so on equally. And subsequently, the persons entitled to equality in the fullest sense are generally understood to be the adult members of a given community. This becomes a serious problem subsequently. So, the other important aspect associated with equality is equality of what? This question has three important answers. One, it is the equality of welfare, that there are people and all the people should have equal opportunities for welfare. And the second one is, it is equality of resources. There are natural resources, there are social resources, and people should have access equally to all of them. And the third one is, it's equality of opportunities. There are certain opportunities and all people should have equal opportunities to those things. So egalitarians are those who favor equality as a prime element of justice. Egalitarians are strongly opposed to inequality, in contrast to sufficientarians, libertarians, or castists. In terms of equality of welfare, welfare is the satisfaction of our preferences that are achieved. That is, both preferences are equal in their achievement. That is to say, there are some crucial problems with this position. One of the problems that we face in this definition of equality is, what if a person's preference are harmful, offensive, or sadistic? Why should we seek to help satisfy such preferences? So, for instance, one might ask this question, that this definition of equality presupposes that there is a homogeneity of people's preferences. And in actual society, this may not be true. There may be heterogeneity of preferences, and the heterogeneity of preferences can be further seen as conflicting preferences. That is, there are some preferences which are not so important as other preferences. There are some preferences which conflict with other preferences. So, how do we adjudicate on this? Take for example, I have cultivated expensive tastes such that the satisfaction of my preference comes to considerable cost over the equal satisfaction of other people's preferences. For instance, I want to buy an expensive car, and now should I be given preference to exercise my preference? And then the question is, there are several people who argue that why should our preferences, which are modest, should be treated equally with the preferences of others which are costly. Now, the question comes to be debated extensively in America, for instance, when people ask this question, why should some people's medical bills be met by the state or other agencies, knowing fully well that they are terminally ill. And this in relation to the medical treatment for other people who are not terminally ill. So in other words, there is a problem in adjudicating what is to be met given the fact that the resources are limited. Given certain resources, what should be the criteria of deciding what preference to be attended to and what preferences should not be attended to? The gradation of preferences becomes a serious problem in this definition of equality. In this definition of equality, the question in its broader connotation is also associated with Marx, who asked the question, why should the resources should be, maximum resources should be owned by few capitalists and the maximum number of people owning very few resources? In other words, why should capitalists enjoy great amount of resources and leave the greater number of people, like the workers, leaving with them only few resources? So this is a big problem of this definition of equality. So all our preferences are not homogeneous. They are heterogeneous, and preferences that are heterogeneous can also be hierarchical. There can be some preferences which are more expensive than other preferences that are less expensive. And then one can also see that one preference may be in conflict with other preference. In other words, the capitalist preference will be in conflict with the workers' preference. So that is the major problem associated with equality of opportunities. Now, this is what led many people to move from this definition of equality, which is equality of opportunities, to equality of resources. For instance, there are resources and you distribute them equally to people. So let's look at this definition of equality. The equality of resources will not have the problems that the equalities of opportunity has. In this, it is very clear that there are resources and these resources are equally distributed. And what you do with these resources is left to individuals, and it is not the concern of the distributing agency to moderate or to negotiate about what one does with these resources. So it is more in terms of not giving opportunities but distributing opportunities or resources to people and then not pursuing anything further. In other words, it is not concerned about giving opportunities to people about the resources and then they face the problem of that some people accessing resources more than the others. That problem is not there with reference to equality of resources. In the equality of resources, resources are there and you distribute these resources equally amongst various people and leave it at that. Okay, so now you know what happens is that you have not done any discrimination with reference to the equality of people. What happens with that is not your concern, and you make sure that there is no discrimination in different people accessing resources in a heterogeneous or in a conflicting manner. Now let us look at what are the problems associated with even this definition of equality of resources, which solved some problems associated with the definition of equality of opportunities. Let us look at them. In the earlier definition of equality, which is equality of opportunities, we have assumed that all opportunities are homogeneous, and that led to some problems, particularly in relation to the diversity of opportunities, the hierarchy of opportunities, or the conflicting nature of opportunities. Now we try to overcome that in the second definition of equality, namely equality of resources. Now here also we face a similar problem, though at a different stage. And what is that? It is that when you distribute resources equally to all the people, you assume that all the people are homogeneous. What if they are not homogeneous? In other words, if there are 100 people and you distribute 100 units, one each to all of them. Now you have done the business of being equal with reference to distribution of resources. What if there is no equality amongst the people who are receiving these resources? Would it not lead to a situation where a person who is less competent uses these resources in a less efficient way than a person who is more competent, who will use these resources more efficiently? In other words, while the distribution of resources is equal, the consequences of this distribution of resources equally may not lead to equality. Okay, this is the point that is made by Marxists again. Marxists have made the point that equality that liberalism talks about in an unequal society promotes inequality. That is what underlies, for instance, the reservation policy adopted by Government of India. Okay, if society is unequal, there is caste system, and then you give equal opportunities to an unequal people, that would only make the people who are more efficient to make use of these equally distributed resources more efficiently at the cost of those who are less efficient because of social background, history, or even biological deficiencies or physical deficiencies to use it less. That's why this equal distribution of resources faces an enormous problem of leading to a situation of inequality. So this is another case where equality promotes inequality, to put it in a very extreme case. This is the problem associated with equality of distribution of resources. See, other instance of a problem associated with equal distribution of resources is that there is a person A who uses the resources and works hard and makes more money or generates more resources. And there is a person B who also takes the equally distributed resources and he remains lazy, he does not do any work, and then he produces less than the A who produces more. So there is this serious discrepancy about the consequences of the resources that are put to use. So this is the major problem, and the problem that is raised in this context is, what should society do to address this problem? Should society ask the lazy person to work more, thus interfering with his freedom and liberty? Or should it ask A not to work so hard so that there is some kind of equality between A and B in terms of what they produce? In addition to the difference with regard to the disposition, namely some people using resources putting to hard work and some people remaining lazy or not putting them to hard work, there can be very important difference, which is what is called as a genetically determined nature that distinguishes one person from the other person. There can be some people who are born strong, healthy, and there can be some people who are born with some deformations, or for instance they can be differently challenged. Okay, so what does one do? If you distribute resources equally to two different people of this example, then somebody will make better use of them and the other person will not make that much use of them. So what does a state do when confronted with a situation like this? This is another instance where equal distribution of resources do not promote equality in consequences. Rather, they would promote equality. This is an instance of equality promoting inequality. Faced with this problem, both at the level of equality of opportunities and equality of resources, there is a third definition of equality, which is not with regard to equal opportunities or equal distribution of resources, but looking for equality in the welfare. That your program should be such that people have equal welfare situations. That would mean that each person faces a set of options that is equivalent to every other person in terms of the prospect for the satisfaction of their preferences, whatever they may be. Thus, if persons are entitled to an equal opportunity to welfare, then any actual inequalities in welfare would be due to factors within each person's control. So this moves from the opportunities and resources to welfare. So with this discussion of three definitions of equality, let us move into the discussion of by a specific thinker, that is John Rawls, in his book A Theory of Justice. For Rawls, what constitutes equality centers around what are the primary goods. That is, equality is about the primary goods. And what are primary goods? Primary goods for Rawls are things that any rational person could reasonably be expected to want, such as liberty and opportunity, income and wealth, and the basis of self-respect. These constitutes the primary goods. Primary goods are distributed in accordance with the two principles of justice, and they are: one, liberty principle. According to liberty principle, each person is to have an equal right to the most extensive total system of equal basic liberties compatible with a similar system of liberty for all. And the second one is social and economic inequalities are to be arranged so that they are both one, difference principle to the greatest benefit of the least advantage, and two, equal opportunity principle, that is attached to offices and positions open to all under conditions of fair equality of opportunity. After Rawls, there are many people who criticized him, and one of the important person who criticized him is G.A. Cohen, and the other one is Robert Nozick. Cohen criticized Rawls for an insidious tendency he saw in his writings, that is, in the writings of Rawls, of both claiming that his philosophy was on the side of the unprivileged and worst off, while at the same time permitting inequalities and even justifying them as fair. This is the major criticism, that Cohen finds justification for capitalism kind of society in Rawls, who emphasizes the principle of liberty. At the same time, Rawls also claims that he is concerned about the underprivileged. Cohen brings out this either explicit or underlying inconsistency in Rawls in his writings. Robert Nozick, on the other hand, argued that Rawls' two principles of justice were in irreconcilable conflict. And according to Nozick, that these two principles attempt to redistribute justly held wealth, and this tantamounts to a violation of liberty, and in some cases, such as taxation with the aim of redistribution of wealth, could even be referred to as slavery. So for Nozick, that redistribution that is central to Rawls can lead to illiberal activity. Now, the other important person who criticized Rawls was Amartya Sen. Sen took issues with Rawls' notion of primary goods, rejecting this primary material notion of well-being in favor of a capability approach. So let us look at, for instance, very important contemporary problem in relation to inequality and reservation. How do we justify an unequal treatment? And some responses are: 1, right to property, personal disabilities, merit or desert. Such responses highlight that much of the primary competition through our egalitarian leanings derive from: 1, our ambition to balance other basic or apparently legitimate rights, for example, liberty and property. 2, feeling the need to account for brute luck or misfortunes that it would be inhuman not to remedy in some way. And 3, the intuition that talent and hard work should be rewarded and encouraged. In terms of Rawls' difference principle, there is a plausible argument that reservation as a policy to reverse conscious social and economic inequalities is being arranged in order to be of greatest benefit. In the beginning, I said that there is a notion of equality outside the West, particularly in India. And India, the notion of equality is proposed by Buddha. There are two important aspects in Buddha. 1, his outright rejection of inequality, particularly the caste system that is prevalent in Hinduism. The other important point that is central to Buddha is his endorsement of equality in the principle of dharma. Now, it is this that attracted Ambedkar towards Buddhism. Now, an important point that we have to keep in mind is that there are two important phases in Buddha's life. One is the first phase, and in that phase you find him outrightly rejecting inequality and caste system. But then he was not ready to admit women as monks in his order. Okay? It is Suddhodana, the princess, who went to him asking him permission to become a sannyasi. And Buddha seems to have turned it down twice, and it's only on the third instance he agreed to her request and she became a nun. Thus, you have Buddha initially rejecting caste system and subsequently also rejecting gender discrimination. So now you have a very important aspects of both equality and non-discrimination at the level of gender as available in Buddha. So we have discussed the idea of equality in political philosophy. We began by looking at three different definitions of equality and then moved on to the discussion of equality in John Rawls. And then we also discussed three critics of Rawls, that is Cohen, Nozick and Sain. And then we moved on to the discussion of the idea of equality in Ambedkar's reading of Buddhism and how Ambedkar made a case for a more discussion for the idea of equality in discussing the evil practices in Indian society. So this is the important topic in political philosophy, and I look forward you are reading the text and start discussing it. Thanking you.